A cop ignored a shivering puppy until he saw the kidnapped child's ribbon. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The Hook. A hardened police officer thinks he's seen every urban tragedy until a trembling puppy drops a child's pink ribbon at his feet, and suddenly the empty alleyway feels like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. The morning frost bit through Officer John H. Follis's uniform as he navigated the grid of shuttered warehouses on the city's east side. It was the kind of cold that made even seasoned cops question their career choices, the kind where your breath crystallized before it left your lips. When dispatch crackled with reports of a dog causing a disturbance near the abandoned textile district, John almost ignored it. Animal control's problem, not his. But something in the caller's voice, an edge of unease that didn't match a simple stray sighting, made him swing his patrol car toward the coordinates. What he found wasn't just a dog. It was a scrappy terrier mix, matted and shaking, sitting in a widening puddle of melted snow, clutching something impossibly bright against the gray concrete. A ribbon. Pink satin, unmistakably a child's. And when the puppy locked eyes with him, John saw something that didn't belong in an animal. The frantic intelligence of someone with a message they couldn't speak. The first time the puppy dropped the ribbon, John thought it was an accident. He crouched down, extending a gloved hand in the universal gesture of appeasement, expecting the terrier to bolt. Instead, the dog opened its jaws, let the pink satin fall onto the concrete with a whisper-soft sound, then immediately snatched it back up. Not playful. Deliberate. "Easy, boy," John murmured, straightening. His knees protested. Too many years of patrol shifts and not enough stretching. "Animal control's on their way." He turned toward his cruiser, already mentally filing the incident under resolved. The engine was still running, pumping expensive heat into the frozen air. 5 steps. That's how far he got. The barking started like a car alarm. Sharp, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. John spun around. The puppy had followed, closing the distance between them to barely 3 feet. As John watched, the dog performed the sequence again, dropped the ribbon, nosed it toward John's boot, then retrieved it before he could react. "What the hell?" John's breath clouded between them. The pattern repeated. Drop. Nudge. Retrieve. The terrier's brown eyes never left John's face, and in them he saw something that made his tactical training kick in. The same desperate focus he'd witnessed in witnesses trying to communicate through shock, in victims who'd lost their voices but not their urgency. This wasn't random behavior. This was communication. John's radio crackled. "Unit 7, what's your status?" He silenced it with a quick tap, never breaking eye contact with the dog. The ribbon gleamed against the dirty snow, a splash of innocence in a landscape of industrial rot. When was the last time he'd seen something that color in this neighborhood? When was the last time he'd seen a child here at all? The Amber Alert. 3 days old. Emma Martinez, age 7, last seen wearing. His stomach dropped. "Show me," John said quietly, the words surprising him as they left his mouth. "If you've got something to show me, let's go." The change in the puppy was instantaneous. The barking stopped. The terrier spun, trotted 5 yards, then looked back with unmistakable expectation. When John followed, the dog's tail lifted fractionally, not quite wagging, but acknowledging. Leading. They moved deeper into the maze of shuttered buildings, the puppy setting a pace just slow enough for John to follow, just fast enough to convey urgency. The ribbon dangled from its mouth like a banner, occasionally dragging through the snow, leaving a faint pink trail. John radioed his position, requested backup, and followed a stray dog into the darkness. His training screamed that this was illogical. His instinct, dormant for so long he'd forgotten its voice, whispered that sometimes the most important messages come from the most unexpected messengers. The puppy stopped at a rusted basement door, dropped the ribbon one final time, and began to dig. The basement door shrieked when John forced it open, rust flaking onto his gloves like dried blood. Charlie didn't wait for permission. The terrier slipped through the gap and disappeared into the darkness below, the pink ribbon finally abandoned on the threshold like a breadcrumb for whoever came next. "Wait!" John hissed, but the dog was already gone. He clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through air so cold it seemed solid. The stairs descended at a treacherous angle, each step slick with condensation that had frozen into a death trap. John's hand found the railing, what was left of it, and he started down, counting steps out of habit. 12. 13. The number felt wrong, too deep for a standard basement. Ahead, he could hear Charlie's claws scrabbling against concrete, then a sound that stopped John's heart, a whimper. Not distress. Recognition. "Police!" John called out, his voice echoing in the confined space. "If anyone's down here, identify yourself." Silence. Then Charlie's barking resumed, but different now, higher pitched, frantic. John swept his light across the basement, catching glimpses of its former life. Collapsed shelving units, industrial sewing machines frozen mid-stitch, mountains of rotted fabric that gave off a smell like wet graves. The beam found Charlie 20 feet ahead, pawing at something behind an overturned desk. When John reached the dog, he saw her. Emma Martinez looked like she was sleeping, curled on her side atop a nest of moth-eaten blankets. Her lips were blue. Her small hands, bound with zip ties, were tucked against her chest. She wasn't moving. "No, no, no!" John dropped to his knees, his radio already in his hand. "Dispatch, I need EMS to my location immediately. I have the missing Martinez girl, unconscious, possible hypothermia." His fingers found her neck, searching for a pulse. There. Faint, slow, but there. Charlie pressed against Emma's back, his small body trembling but determined, and John understood with sudden clarity what had happened. This dog had been keeping her warm. Had stayed when he could have fled. Had left her only when leaving became the last desperate option for saving her. "You stayed with her," John whispered, shrugging out of his jacket to drape over the child. "You stayed, and then you came back." Only now, in the flashlight's glow, did John notice Charlie's injuries. The terrier's right front paw was swollen, possibly broken. Deep scratches ran along his flank, old wounds, scabbed over, suggesting days of struggle. His coat, matted with filth, couldn't hide the protruding ribs of an animal who'd given his own body heat to someone smaller, colder, more fragile. This wasn't a stray who'd stumbled onto a crime scene. This was a survivor who'd made a choice. Footsteps thundered above, backup arriving. John lifted Emma carefully, feeling her slight weight settle against his chest. Charlie tried to follow but stumbled, his injured paw buckling. Without thinking, John scooped the dog up with his free arm, cradling both rescuer and rescued as he climbed back toward the light. "Hold on," he murmured to them both. "Both of you, just hold on." Charlie's tongue flicked out, touching Emma's hand where it dangled limply. The gesture was so tender, so deliberate, that John felt something crack in his chest, the ice he'd built around his heart over 15 years of witnessing suffering. By the time they emerged into the frozen morning, sirens were converging from every direction, and John Follis, who'd learned to expect the worst from every call, was learning to believe in small miracles again. The door was newer than it should have been. John noticed it immediately, a detail his brain catalogued even as Charlie pawed frantically at the rusted metal. In a building abandoned for at least a decade, where every surface wore the patina of neglect, this basement entrance had fresh scratches around the lock. Recent installation. Someone had wanted access to what lay below. Someone had wanted privacy. His radio crackled. Unit 7, backup is 3 minutes out. Advise status. Preparing to enter structure, John replied, his voice steadier than his hands. Possible connection to Martinez Amber alert. The terrier's whining escalated, a sound like air escaping a wound. Charlie's injured paw left small smears of blood on the door where he clawed, oblivious to his own pain. John had seen search and rescue dogs work before, German shepherds trained for months, handlers guiding every movement. This wasn't that. This was desperation distilled into fur and bone. Back up, boy! John positioned his flashlight, drew his weapon. Police! I'm coming in! The lock surrendered to his boot on the second kick. The door swung inward, releasing air so cold and stale it felt like opening a crypt. Charlie bolted past him, a blur of matted fur disappearing downstairs John couldn't yet see. Damn it! John followed, his flashlight beam jerking across walls that glistened with frozen condensation. The stairs were steep, industrial, designed for workers who no longer existed. Each step groaned under his weight, the sound absurdly loud in the pressing silence. Then he heard it. Not Charlie's claws or his own breathing, but something else. Something that made his training evaporate and his instincts take over. A whimper. Human. Child-sized. The flashlight found her in pieces. First a sneaker, Nike, size small, matching the Amber Alert description. Then pink fabric, not a ribbon this time but a jacket sleeve. Then the curve of a shoulder, impossibly small, impossibly still. Emma? His voice cracked on her name. Emma Martinez? Charlie had already reached her, was already pressing his body against hers, in a futile attempt to share warmth he no longer had to give. The dog's eyes found John's in the darkness, and in them was an accusation, a plea, a question. Why did it take you so long? John's hands were already moving, checking for a pulse, calling for EMS, stripping off his jacket. The girl's skin was ice. Her lips were blue. The zip ties around her wrists had rubbed her skin raw, and in the nest of blankets where she lay, John saw the evidence of Charlie's vigil, paw prints in the dust, a small depression where the dog had curled against her, drag marks where he tried to pull the blankets closer around her fragile body. You stayed with her. John's voice was barely a whisper. You could have run. You could have saved yourself. But Charlie hadn't run. Even now, injured and exhausted, the terrier refused to leave Emma's side, his small body trembling but resolute. John gathered the child into his arms, felt her faint heartbeat against his chest. When he stood, Charlie tried to follow and collapsed, his broken paw finally giving out. Without hesitation, John scooped the dog up too, cradling both lives against his body, as he climbed back toward the light. Behind them, the basement exhaled its secrets into the frozen air, evidence that would lead to an arrest, to justice, to headlines. But John wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the weight in his arms, about the small warm tongue that had just licked Emma's dangling hand, about the way Charlie's eyes had held his in the darkness. He was thinking about what it meant to refuse to give up on someone, even when giving up would be easier. Especially then. The winter light hit them like a physical blow when John emerged from the basement, Emma limp in his arms, Charlie tucked against his side. 3 patrol cars had converged on the scene, their lights painting the snow in strobes of red and blue. Faces turned toward him, fellow officers, paramedics unloading a gurney, but John registered them only as obstacles between Emma and survival. "Hypothermia," he barked at the nearest EMT. 3 days exposure, maybe more. She's barely breathing." Hands reached for the girl, but Charlie erupted into snarling fury, his small body twisting in John's grip. The terrier's teeth bared, his growl vibrating through John's chest, a sound too big for such a small creature, carrying all the weight of his 72-hour vigil. "He won't let her go," John said, and somehow the EMT, a woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, understood immediately. "Then he rides with us." She gestured to the ambulance. "Both of them." John set Charlie down gently beside the gurney where they'd laid Emma. The dog immediately positioned himself at her head, his muzzle resting against her pale cheek. When the EMT tried to attach monitoring equipment, Charlie tracked every movement with laser focus, allowing access but watching, always watching. "Core temp is 89 degrees, the EMT called out, her voice tight. "Starting active rewarming." John had seen hypothermia before. He knew what 89 meant: severe, life-threatening, a temperature where the heart could stop with any sudden movement. He watched them work, wrapping Emma in thermal blankets, starting in 4, their hands moving with practiced urgency while Charlie remained motionless, a small guardian car from determination. "Sir?" A young officer approached, notebook ready. "We need your statement. What happened down there?" John turned, and something in his expression made the officer step back. "Later," John said. The word was granted. He climbed into the ambulance instead, ignoring protocol, ignoring the radio squawking for his attention. Charlie's eyes met his, and for a moment they were united in purpose, 2 beings who'd found something worth breaking rules for. The ride to the hospital took 7 minutes. Emma's temperature climbed to 91, then 93. Her fingers twitched. Her eyelids fluttered without opening. Each small sign of life felt like a gift Charlie had earned through sheer force of will. "She's fighting," the EMT murmured, adjusting the thermal blanket. "Whatever kept her alive down there, it's giving her a chance now." John's hand found Charlie's back, felt the rapid heartbeat beneath matted fur. "Not whatever. Whoever." At the emergency room entrance, they tried to separate them again, Emma to Trauma Bay 1, Charlie to nowhere technically. The dog had no place in their sterile protocols. But when orderlies attempted to lift Emma's gurney, Charlie planted himself across her chest, and the look in his eyes stopped everyone cold. 5 minutes, a doctor said, surprising them all. "Let him have 5 minutes." In those 5 minutes, Emma's eyes opened. Not fully, not with recognition, but enough. Her gaze found Charlie's face inches from her own. Her cracked lips moved, forming a word John couldn't hear, but Charlie seemed to understand. The terrier's tail wagged once. A tiny, exhausted movement that said, "I'm here, you're safe. I didn't leave you." Then nurses were gently lifting Charlie away, and John was gathering him up again, feeling the dog's body sag with the weight of what he'd carried for 3 days. The pink ribbon was still clenched in his jaw, soggy and torn, holding on by threads. "You can let go now," John whispered. "I've got her. I've got both of you." But Charlie held on a moment longer, as if the ribbon was the only proof that any of this had happened, that he'd found her, saved her, brought help. Only when Emma disappeared behind the trauma bay doors did his jaw finally relax, releasing the silk onto John's palm. John closed his fingers around it, feeling its weight like a promise he didn't yet understand he'd made. Emma woke on the third day. John was in the waiting room when it happened, Charlie asleep across his lap, the terrier's broken paw wrapped in a bright blue cast. They'd become fixtures at the hospital, the cop who wouldn't leave, and the dog who shouldn't be there but somehow was, their presence tolerated by staff who'd heard the story and bent the rules accordingly. The doctor found them there, her expression cautiously optimistic. "She's asking for him." Charlie's head lifted before John could respond, ears pricked, as if he'd heard Emma's voice through walls and floors. John carried him to the pediatric ICU, past the nurse's station where someone had taped a printout of a news article. "Hero dog saves missing girl." The headline felt inadequate, like trying to capture an ocean in a teaspoon. Emma's room was filled with flowers, balloons, cards from strangers. But her eyes were only for Charlie. "You came back," she whispered, her voice raw from the intubation tube they'd removed that morning. Tears tracked down her face as John lowered Charlie onto the bed beside her. "You promised you'd get help, and you did." The words hit John like a physical blow. "Promised?" Emma's mother, Maria, stood at the bedside, her own eyes red-rimmed. "She's been saying that since she woke up. That Charlie talked to her, that he promised." "Not talked," Emma corrected, her small hand finding Charlie's head. "But I understood. When he left, I was so scared, but he looked at me and I just knew. He was going to find someone." John sank into the chair beside the bed, watching as Charlie pressed his muzzle against Emma's palm, his tail wagging in slow, careful sweeps. "Emma, can you tell me what happened? How you met Charlie?" The story came out in fragments. Emma had been taken from her front yard, kept in the cold basement for what felt like forever. Then, on the second night, scratching sounds from above. The basement door opening just enough for a small body to slip through. Charlie, his collar broken, his coat matted with dirt, fleeing something himself. "He was scared too," Emma said. "But he stayed with me. He kept me warm when I was so cold I couldn't feel my fingers. And when I started to fall asleep, the bad kind of sleep, where everything gets fuzzy, he licked my face and wouldn't let me close my eyes." John glanced at Maria, saw her hand pressed to her mouth. "Then yesterday, or maybe it was yesterday, I don't know, Charlie started trying to dig at the door. He kept looking at me and then at the door, and I told him to go. To save himself." Emma's voice cracked. "But he wouldn't. Not until I said, 'Go get help.' Like he needed permission. He did get help," John said quietly. "He found me." A detective appeared in the doorway, someone from animal control beside him. John recognized the look on their faces, the administrative cleanup after the heroics were done. "We've located Charlie's owner," the detective said. "Name's Gordon Webb. Lives about 2 miles from the abduction site. He's not interested in reclaiming the dog. Says it was a stray he never really wanted, that his girlfriend brought it home." The words hung in the air like smoke. John felt Charlie tense against his leg, felt the small body that had endured so much begin to tremble. Emma's hand tightened in the terrier's fur. "What happens to him?" Maria asked, though her voice said she already knew the answer. The animal control officer shifted uncomfortably. "Shelter, most likely. We'll do our best to." "No," John said. The word came out harder than he'd intended. "No, he's coming home with me." 3 faces turned toward him, Maria surprised, the officials relieved, Emma radiant. Really? Emma's smile was the first full, genuine expression John had seen cross her face. You'll keep him? John looked down at Charlie, at the dog who'd chosen courage over safety, who'd kept a promise to a child he found by chance. Yeah, he said, and felt something shift in his chest, some frozen thing beginning to thaw. Yeah, I'll keep him. Charlie's tail wagged harder, and Emma laughed, a sound like bells after a long winter. The arrest came 26 hours after Emma opened her eyes. John wasn't there when they took Marcus Welch down. He was at the hospital, filling out the adoption paperwork for Charlie, while Emma colored a picture of a small brown dog wearing a police badge. But he heard the details later, pieced together from detective reports and the footage that would eventually play in courtrooms. Welch had been a maintenance worker at Emma's elementary school for 3 years. Invisible in his gray coveralls, carrying keys that opened every door, trusted with access to places where children learned and played. The basement where he kept Emma belonged to a building his uncle owned, condemned but not yet demolished, a gap in bureaucracy that had become a tomb. The detectives found everything in his apartment: photographs of Emma leaving school, maps of her walking route home, a pink hairband matching the one Charlie had torn away during Emma's abduction, and a bus ticket to Tucson, dated for that evening, purchased the morning after Charlie had led John to the basement. He'd planned to run. Would have succeeded, too, if not for a dog who refused to give up. He made one mistake, Detective Sarah Chin told John over bad hospital coffee. He underestimated the basement door. Thought he'd secured it well enough that nothing could get in. But Charlie was small, desperate, and that lock was just cheap enough to fail when the terrier threw himself against it repeatedly. John thought of Charlie's broken paw, the scratches along his flank. How many times? Based on the damage to the door frame? The vet thinks at least a dozen impacts over several hours before it gave way. Chin's expression hardened. That dog earned every injury saving her. The news coverage was relentless. Hero dog leads police to missing girl. Miracle in the textile district. Camera crews camped outside the hospital, wanting shots of Charlie, of Emma, of the officer who'd listened when a stray dog tried to speak. John avoided them all. This wasn't about headlines or commendations. This was about a 7-year-old girl who still flinched at sudden noises, a terrier who still limped on his healing paw, and the strange alchemy that had bound 3 broken pieces into something resembling whole. Welch was arraigned on 14 counts, including kidnapping, child endangerment, and unlawful imprisonment. His public defender entered a plea of not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The trial would be a formality. What mattered was that Emma was safe, that her family could sleep again, that the Amber Alert that had hung over the city like a shroud could finally be lifted. John stood at Emma's hospital window, watching the city lights blink on against the dusk. Charlie pressed against his leg, a warm weight that had become familiar in just days. Behind them, Emma was explaining to her mother how she wanted to learn dog training when she grew up, how she wanted to teach other dogs to be brave like Charlie. Officer Follis? Maria approached, her voice soft. I don't know how to thank you. For everything. John shook his head. Thank him. He gestured to Charlie. I just followed where he led. Still. Maria's eyes shimmered. You could have ignored the call. Could have waited for animal control. Could have dismissed what you saw as coincidence. She paused. Emma's therapist says she's going to need support. That seeing Charlie regularly will help her process the trauma, give her something positive to associate with what happened. She can see him whenever she wants, John said immediately. I'll bring him by, as often as she needs. Maria smiled, and in it John saw the exhaustion of a mother who'd spent 3 days not knowing if her daughter was alive. The apartment won't let us have pets. I hate that we can't give her that. You're giving her everything else, John said. I'll give her this. Through the window, the city sprawled, the same streets John had patrolled for 15 years, seeing only problems to solve, boxes to check, tragedies to document. But now, with Charlie's weight against his leg and Emma's laughter floating from the room behind him, those streets looked different. They looked like a place where small miracles could happen, where the smallest creatures could carry the most urgent messages, where sometimes the thing you weren't looking for turned out to be exactly what you needed. Marcus Welch would face justice. Emma would heal. Charlie would have a home. And John Follis would learn what it meant to hope again. Dr. Patricia Reeves delivered the news in her office overlooking the hospital courtyard, where Emma and Charlie played under Maria's watchful eye. The terrier's cast had come off 2 days earlier, but he still favored the paw, a permanent reminder of the door he'd broken through. Emma's attachment to Charlie isn't just emotional comfort, Dr. Reeves said, her fingers steepled on her desk. It's neurological. Her brain has coded Charlie as the reason she survived. When she starts to panic, and she will, Officer Follis, trauma doesn't resolve in 2 weeks. Seeing Charlie, touching him, these things literally calm her nervous system. It's Pavlovian, but in the best possible way. John watched Emma through the window. She was braiding something into Charlie's fur, strips of pink ribbon the nurses had found for her. The terrier sat perfectly still, patient as stone, while her small fingers worked. How long? John asked. Months. Maybe years. Dr. Reeves followed his gaze. The research on trauma bonds with therapy animals is compelling. Children who maintain contact with the source of their rescue show significantly better outcomes. Lower rates of PTSD, fewer night terrors, faster emotional recovery. I'll bring him as often as she needs. I know you will. Dr. Reeves pulled a folder from her drawer. But there's a complication. The Martinez family lives in the Riverside Apartments. Rent-controlled, one of the last affordable units in that neighborhood. I spoke with Maria this morning. Their lease has a no-pets clause. The landlord, Mr. Kelvin, is inflexible. John's jaw tightened. They could move. To where? Market rate for a 2-bedroom in this city is triple what they're paying. Maria works 2 jobs as it is. They'd have to leave the neighborhood, which means changing Emma's school. The same school where Welch worked, yes, but also where her friends are, her teachers, her routine. Uprooting her now could be as traumatic as separation from Charlie. The word hung between them. Impossible. An impossible choice between safety and stability, between healing and housing. Through the window, Charlie's head lifted, tracking something only he could sense. Emma's hand dropped to his back automatically, her small fingers curling into his fur. An anchor, a touchstone, proved she wasn't alone in the dark anymore. What if I bring him every day? John offered. Morning and evening. She could see him before school, after dinner. It's not enough. Dr. Reeves's voice was gentle but firm. She needs to know he's there. Especially at night, when the fear is strongest. When she wakes from nightmares, and she needs to be able to reach for him. John stood, moved to the window. Below, Maria had joined Emma on the bench. She was stroking Charlie's head, and even from this distance, John could see the tears on her face. A mother understanding that the thing her daughter needed most was the thing she couldn't provide. I won't let her lose him, John said quietly. There has to be a solution. There isn't always a solution, Officer Follis. Sometimes the systems we've built don't account for miracles. They don't have boxes for heroic dogs or traumatized children or the connections that save lives. Dr. Reeves joined him at the window. Sometimes good people have to choose between bad options. But John was thinking about a bitter winter morning, about a pink ribbon in the snow, about a puppy who'd refused to accept that some problems didn't have answers. Charlie hadn't known the odds were impossible. Hadn't known that the basement door was too heavy, the cold too severe, the chance of finding help too remote. He tried anyway. "I need to talk to the landlord," John said. "He won't budge." "Maria already tried." John smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Maria isn't a cop who just saved a little girl's life, who has the mayor's office calling twice a day asking for statements, who has every news channel in the state wanting an interview." Dr. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "You'd leverage publicity?" "I'd leverage whatever it takes." John headed for the door, then paused. "Charlie taught me something. Sometimes the smallest creatures carry the most important messages. And sometimes the right thing to do is the thing everyone tells you is impossible." John found Charlie in Kennel 17, pressed against the back corner like he was trying to disappear. The shelter volunteer, a tired-looking woman named Beth, unlocked the gate with an apologetic grimace. "He hasn't eaten since we got him. Won't play, won't engage. The vet says physically he's healing fine, but—" She trailed off, gesturing at the small brown form that barely acknowledged their presence. John knelt at the kennel entrance. "Hey, buddy. Remember me?" Charlie's head lifted fractionally. His tail didn't wag. The spark John had seen in those brown eyes, the fierce intelligence, the desperate determination, had dimmed to almost nothing. This wasn't the dog who'd refused to give up on Emma. This was an animal who'd given everything and had nothing left. "How long can you keep him?" John asked, though he already knew the answer. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we're not at capacity. After that—" Beth's expression said the rest. After that came the decisions no one wanted to make, the arithmetic of limited space and unlimited need. John's phone buzzed. A text from Maria Martinez. "Emma's asking about Charlie. Can you bring him by this week?" He looked at the dog who'd saved a child's life and been rewarded with abandonment. At the kennel that would become a cage, then a death sentence. At the choice that shouldn't have been a choice at all. "I'll take him," John said. "Today." Beth blinked. "You're sure?" "Dogs like Charlie, they bond hard. He's going to need consistency, patience, probably some behavioral support after what he's been through." "I'm sure." 20 minutes later, John was carrying Charlie to his car, the terrier's body rigid with confusion. He'd prepared for this, stopped at the pet store that morning, loaded his cart with supplies he'd Googled at 2 a.m. Dog bed, food bowls, leash collar, toys that the website promised were perfect for anxious rescues. He'd never owned a dog. Had convinced himself for years that his schedule, his lifestyle, his carefully maintained emotional distance made pet ownership impossible. But that was before a scrappy terrier had looked at him with eyes that said, "Please, I need you to understand," and changed everything. At home, a one-bedroom apartment he'd never bothered to make feel like more than a place to sleep, John set Charlie down gently. The dog stood frozen in the center of the living room, taking in surroundings that must have seemed incomprehensible after kennels and basements, and whatever hell he'd fled before finding Emma. "It's okay," John said quietly. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. No one's going to leave you." Charlie's ears swiveled toward his voice, but the dog didn't move. John sat on the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. He pulled out his phone and showed Charlie a photo. Emma in her hospital bed, smiling, holding the drawing she'd made of a brown dog wearing a badge. "See her? Emma. She's asking about you. Missing you." John's voice caught. "She needs to see you're okay. That you didn't disappear like she almost did." Something shifted in Charlie's expression. The terrier took a tentative step forward, then another, until his nose pressed against the phone screen. A small whine escaped his throat, not distress, but recognition. "Yeah, that's her. And we're going to visit her tomorrow, okay? And the day after that. As many times as she needs." John reached out slowly, let Charlie sniff his hand before touching the dog's head. "You saved her life. Now let me save yours." Charlie leaned into the touch, just slightly, and John felt the weight of what he'd committed to. Not just adoption papers and veterinary bills, but the responsibility of healing. Of being someone another creature could depend on. For the first time in 15 years, the prospect didn't terrify him. It felt right. That night, Charlie slept on the dog bed John had placed beside his own bed. And when John woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of whimpering, he didn't hesitate, just lifted the terrier onto the covers and felt the small body curl against his chest, finally, tentatively, beginning to trust again. In the darkness, John whispered, "We're going to be okay. All three of us." And for the first time since that frozen morning in the textile district, he believed it. 6 months later, spring had finally broken winter's grip on the city. John pulled into the Martinez family's parking lot with Charlie already vibrating with excitement in the passenger seat. The terrier knew this route by heart now. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, every Saturday afternoon. The visits had become ritual, therapy, and joy all woven together. Emma was waiting on the apartment steps, her mother close behind. The girl's hair had grown back where they'd shaved it for the hypothermia treatment, and someone had woven a new pink ribbon through her ponytail. Not the same ribbon. That one lived in an evidence locker, catalogued under case number 24 to 7856, but close enough to reclaim what had been taken. Charlie bounded from the car the moment John opened the door, his limp barely noticeable now. The reunion never got old. Emma dropping to her knees, Charlie leaping into her arms, both of them dissolving into the kind of pure happiness that had no room for shadows. "He's been good?" Maria asked, though she asked every time and John's answer never changed. "Perfect. Though he did try to hurt my neighbor's kids yesterday." "Protective instinct," Maria said, smiling. "Dr. Chen says it's common in dogs who've experienced what Charlie has. They appoint themselves guardians." John watched Emma and Charlie playing on the grass. A simple game of fetch that 6 months ago would have been impossible for either of them. Emma's nightmares had decreased from nightly to occasional. She could sleep with the lights off now, could walk past basement doors without panicking. Charlie's presence during her therapy sessions had proven invaluable. The dog somehow understood when to press close, when to offer his paw, when to simply exist as proof that trauma didn't have to be the end of the story. "How's she doing?" John asked quietly. "Better. The trial helped, knowing he's not coming back. And having Charlie in her life." Maria's voice caught. "It gave her something to look forward to. Something pure." Emma ran over, slightly winded, Charlie trotting beside her. "Officer John, can I show you something?" She pulled a pink ribbon from her pocket, not new, but carefully preserved, the edges frayed but the satin still bright. Emma tied it gently around Charlie's collar, her small fingers working the bow with practiced care. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "Now everyone knows you're a hero." Charlie's tail wagged, and John could have sworn the dog understood exactly what the gesture meant. Later, driving home with Charlie dozing in the passenger seat, the ribbon still tied to his collar, John thought about the question he'd been asking himself for 6 months. Who had saved whom? He'd saved Emma. Charlie had saved Emma. But in the saving, something had shifted in John's carefully constructed walls. The city he patrolled for 15 years with cynical detachment now felt different, still broken in places, still carrying its share of tragedy, but also capable of small miracles. A stray dog with a message. A child who'd survived against impossible odds. A cop who'd learned to hope again. Charlie had taught him that courage wasn't about size or strength. It was about refusing to give up when giving up would be easier. About carrying messages no one else could deliver. About choosing to stay when running would save you, because staying might save someone else. At a red light, John reached over and scratched behind Charlie's ears. The terrier leaned into the touch, still wearing Emma's ribbon like a badge of honor. "You know what, buddy?" John said softly. "I think we saved each other." Charlie's tail thumped once against the seat. Agreement, affirmation, or maybe just the contentment of being exactly where he belonged. And as the light turned green and John drove toward home, a home that now held dog toys and food bowls, and a 4-pound hero who'd taught him what really mattered, he realized that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the most urgent messages. And sometimes, the thing you weren't looking for turns out to be exactly what you needed all along. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. More stories are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one. I'll see you in next story.